that we actually swallow, that gets dumped into the stomach. And as the stomach churns, so mixes, it physically digests, so it gurgles and it breaks it down. Okay, the stomach is lined with muscle, and that muscle is contracting and releasing. Okay, so it acts as a mixer. Those gastric juices, so the hydrochloric acid, the pepsin, there's other substances in there that we're not really going to talk about. What ends up happening is it creates this soupy mixture, okay, which doesn't sound all that appetizing, I grant you, but that soupy mixture is what we're going to refer to this stuff as we move along. That soupy mixture has a name, and it's called chyme. Okay, so from now on, we're going to refer to the food stuff as chyme. Now, chyme is super acidic. Once that chyme is done being broken down inside the stomach, it's got to move on down to the tube. All right? But here's the interesting part. We go from a pH of 2 in the stomach to this first segment here. It kind of looks like a bit of a horseshoe. Okay? It's about 25 centimeters long. And it's the first section of the small intestine, also known as the duodenum. And the duodenum's pH is 7.2 or so. How is that going to happen? How can you take a super acidic substance and raise its pH to not be acid, to be more or less neutral? Okay, so we've talked about how food is going to come out of this pyloric sphincter here. All right, so I will just draw this under here. The pyloric sphincter. And the pyloric sphincter is just going to open up and close, again, like the lower esophageal sphincter, same thing. It's going to dump food into the duodenum. Now, the duodenum, interestingly enough, also has some mucus, okay? But its mucus lining is nowhere near as big as the mucus lining in the stomach. So here's where another organ comes into play. And that organ is called the pancreas. All right, your pancreas is a relatively flat organ underneath the stomach. Okay, so pancreas. And what your pancreas does, one of the ways that the pancreas, one of its jobs, because it has several, but one of its main jobs is that it creates sodium bicarbonate. All right, also known as baking soda. And there is a duct or a tube that goes from the actual pancreas, okay, into the actual duodenum, and its job is to just dump baking soda into there. Okay, so this little tube right here, its job is to just dump actual baking soda. All right, so baking soda ends up being dumped into the actual duodenum, and what does it do? It neutralizes the pH. So it brings the pH of the chyme back up to an area that will not deteriorate the remainder of the digestive system. That's so cool. Okay, it's like your body's own protective ability to make sure that it doesn't burn itself up. Okay? So the pancreas produces sodium bicarbonate. sodium bicarbonate, NaCO3, gets dumped in there and it neutralizes the pH. Okay? Digestion, though, is still occurring in here. Okay, so it's not like as soon as it passes that little pyloric sphincter, poof, it's got a pH of 7. No. As it makes its way through, the pH is rising. So that once it gets to that small intestine, its pH will be in the 7, low 7 area. Okay? So that the small intestine, which has very little mucus, will not get burned to shreds. Does that make sense? So what ends up happening here, we see that we've got one little duct here. The pancreatic duct dumps sodium bicarbonate into the actual duodenum. Now, something else gets dumped in there. Anybody know what it is? The last form of chemical digestion, okay, comes in by way of a secretion of a substance that the liver makes. Your liver, as we move through the human body, we're going to see that the liver is phenomenal. Oh my goodness, it does so many things. One of the main things it does is it produces a mineral salt called bile. Okay, and this is not a salt you can put on food. A mineral salt means it's got different metals and non-metals that combine to make these substances. Now, bile also has cholesterol in it and something called bilirubin, which is dead red blood cells. Okay, they use it to make bile. And what bile does is it finishes the digestion of fats. Okay, hydrochloric acid starts the digestion of fats, but bile finishes it. If you've ever done dishes and you've had a greasy dish and you've put a drop of dish soap in there and you've seen the grease push away from the actual soap, okay? Bile works very much the same way that dish soap works on grease. It emulsifies fat molecules. It means it breaks them up and surrounds them, and it breaks them into their smaller little parts so that they can get absorbed. Okay? So, bile is made in the liver. But here's the deal. You don't need bile all the time. So bile is stored in a very small organ that's kind of right on the underside of the liver. It's called the gallbladder. And your gallbladder does not make bile, it just stores it. Which is why, because bile is a salt, you can actually get a buildup of crystals in your gallbladder, and you can have what we call gallstones. And you can have to have your gallbladder removed. It is actually the most common surgery in North America. Okay? So if we look at this, we can see how the stomach goes about breaking down some food stuff and how that breakdown or that digestion gets completed in the duodenum. Once food moves away from the duodenum into the small intestine, it is digested.